She laughed, and the whole Senate looked at each other puzzled and then glared at him with caution. The lowly jester who had spoke out of turn, they knew if he could make her laugh and giggle, then he could make her clap at his brilliance and jiggle in excitement. Pause. She who had earned the name Ironheart. 23 years she had never once smirked, let alone chuckle at anything. They became cautious. But for General Apollo, who had always eyed the queen, saw a golden opportunity. So he thought and said, "My queen, what do you call a Roman with a cold?" "Julius Sneezer." The whole court went quiet. Walls were uncomfortable. The queen herself a poker face. A whole minute had gone by, and so the jester said, "My queen, why do Romans always have a hard time ending relationships? Their ex is always a 10. She brought a hearty laughter, and so the Senate too broke into laughter, some genuine, some kissing her rear's backside, figuratively. And General Apollo couldn't know what to make of that. He was pissed. He was fuming. To make matters worse, the jester told him, "General, why don't you stick to military formations and writing speeches?" She laughed. She chuckled. She tried holding her laugh. Is this what they call rage bait? He thought to himself. But then he realized it would be another 2,000 years before the term would be formed. Either way, the queen-jester duo was anger-inducing and rage-churning. He was embarrassed and muttered to himself, swearing profusely by the very loins that had birthed him he would make him pay. "Settle down and quit your childish comments, General. As for you, Leonidas, the jester's name, this is not the time." Yup, that struck a nerve. 10/10 rage bait. That was the queen they were used to, domineering, cruel, cold. That was how the girl who had inherited the throne at age 14 had survived after the former emperor had been assassinated. The Senate chamber bristled like a nest of snakes disturbed by a careless hand. Robes rustled, whispers slithered from marble bench to marble bench, but the eyes, sharp, skeptical, cold, were all fixed on one man. The jester. Leonidas. A fool with painted cheeks, bells dangling from his boots, who had just undone 11 years of their queen's impenetrable armor with a single stroke of wit. It was not just a laugh. It was a sound they had never heard escape her before. A bright, unguarded joy that made the mosaics on the floor seem less severe, that softened the torches that hissed in iron sconces. To the Senate, it was dangerous. To Apollo, it was blasphemy. Ironheart, the name carved into the tongues of every senator, every whispering servant, every soldier who had once doubted her, had been untouchable. The girl who had been crowned at 14, who had faced assassins, conspirators, foreign kings, and crushed them all without cracking, had finally bent to a jester's wordplay. Apollo's voice thundered in the chamber after her dismissal. "Your Majesty, this cannot stand. A man who hides his tongue behind riddles hides more than foolishness. He hides intent. The Senate must not allow jesters to meddle in matters of the crown." The queen raised a single hand, the gesture silencing even the murmurs of the marble walls. Her voice was iron, clipped, honed. "You speak of matters you do not understand, Apollo. The Senate will adjourn." The sound of benches scraping echoed like grinding stone as the senators obeyed. But Apollo's gaze lingered on Leonidas. His eyes, narrow and seething, carved into him the way a butcher studies the cut of an animal before the blade falls. Leonidas bowed low, bells jingling. The mask of a fool was still painted on his face, but in his chest, his heart hammered with dangerous exhilaration. For the first time, she had seen him. Really seen him. That night, the palace was quiet, save for the wind whispering through the colonnades. The queen sat in her chamber, staring into the polished bronze mirror, as though it might explain to her why laughter had betrayed her lips after so many years of silence. 11 years, she murmured. 11 years, and not once, until tonight. A knock sounded. 2 knocks, soft, deliberate. Her guard, Marcus, stepped inside. A shadow followed him, Leonidas. She did not speak at first, only studied him with those steel-grey eyes. "You risk much by being here," she said. He smiled, not the painted grin of a fool, but the kind of smile that softened even the hardest words. "I risk nothing, my queen. What is life but a jest before the gods?" Marcus shifted uneasily, glancing between them. But the queen lifted her chin, eyes sharp. "And what would you jest of me now, Leonidas?" "No jest," he said quietly, his tone stripped of performance. "Only truth. You have carried Rome on your shoulders since you were 14. You deserve, at least once, to be reminded you are still human." The words settled between them like incense smoke, delicate, heavy, impossible to ignore. For a heartbeat, she forgot Marcus was in the room. For a heartbeat, she forgot her own name, Ironheart. Then, as if struck by the memory of her throne. She straightened in her chair. "Enough," she said, the frost in her voice returning. "The Senate will already whisper about tonight. Do not give them more fuel." Leonidas bowed with exaggerated flourish, the jingle of his bells almost mocking the tension in the room. "As you command, my queen. But remember, even the hardest iron breaks if it never bends." His eyes flicked to hers, and for the briefest instant, she felt the weight of something she could not name. Something that wasn't jest. When he was gone, Marcus lingered by the door, his brow furrowed. "Majesty, I do not trust him. The Senate does not trust him. Apollo especially." She cut him off with a sharp glance. "Apollo has always sought reasons to rid the court of those who displease him. Leonidas is a fool, nothing more." But Marcus tilted his head, studying her with the blunt honesty only a guard could risk. "A fool who made Ironheart laugh." She did not answer. She dismissed him with a wave, but when the chamber fell into silence again, her lips betrayed her with the faintest curve. Across the city, Leonidas shed his jester's cap and bells in the small stone chamber he called home. The laughter of the Senate still echoed in his ears, but beneath it was the memory of her eyes softening, if only for a breath. He set aside the paint, the silks, and reached for the worn leather of a sword hilt hidden under his cot. The weapon was scarred with years of practice. His grandfather's. The man who had trained him since he could walk, who had drilled into him that even a bastard child could carve a place in Rome if his blade was sharp enough. Tonight, Leonidas trained harder than he had in months, his strikes echoing off stone walls until his palms bled. His jest was a mask, his laughter a weapon. But the blade was his truth. In the Senate halls, General Apollo plotted. His pride had been shattered in front of every senator, his authority undermined by the Queen's laughter. That sound haunted him more than her dismissal. A woman he had courted with power, with victories, with loyalty, had never once granted him so much as a smile. But the fool? The fool had taken in one night what he had craved for 11 years. Apollo paced like a lion behind his chamber doors. "He hides something," he muttered to his aide. "No man worms his way into the Queen's favor so easily. He is no fool, he is a spy. And spies, hang." The aide frowned. "There is no proof, General. Rome would not permit execution without cause." Apollo's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Then we will give him cause. If we cannot hang him, we will hurl him where death waits in abundance. The frontlines. Let him prove his loyalty with blood. If he dies, Rome loses nothing. If he survives," his eyes darkened, "then we will know he was never a fool to begin with." 2 nights later, Leonidas was summoned to the Senate chamber. The Queen sat high upon her throne, her face a mask of marble once again. Apollo stood beside her, his voice booming through the hall. "Leonidas, jester of the court, you have been accused of disloyalty to the crown. Though proof is lacking, Rome cannot risk spies within her walls. Therefore, you shall serve your empire in battle. Not as a senator, nor as a commander, but as a soldier on the front lines." A murmur rippled through the chamber. For a jester to be sent to war, it was unheard of. Leonidas bowed low, his grin in place, though his heart beat like a drum of war. "Ah, so the fool trades his bells for a blade. Very well, General. But tell me, will the enemy laugh when they see my painted face?" The Queen's fingers tightened on her throne's armrests. Her iron mask did not crack, but her voice betrayed the faintest tremor. "The decision is final. You leave at dawn." For the first time in years, Leonidas did not answer with a jest. He simply met her eyes, and in them, spoke a vow she alone understood: "I will return." The dawn was merciless. The horns of Rome blared across the barracks as soldiers gathered at the eastern gate. The air smelled of oil, leather, and steel. Banners snapped in the wind like hungry flames. Among them, one man stood out like a clown at a funeral. Bells jingled faintly from his pack, remnants of the jester's garb they had not stripped from him. The soldiers sneered. "A fool among warriors," one spat. "We'll be picking his bones clean before the week's end." Leonidas said nothing. He shouldered the weight of a shield, the leather biting into his scarred palms, and followed the column out of the gates. He had trained for this his entire life in shadows. Now the shadows had spat him into daylight. The battlefield was chaos. Screams tore through the air as arrows hissed down like rain. Mud churned beneath the boots of men locked in struggle. The clang of iron on iron rattled the very marrow of the earth. Leonidas stood in the phalanx, shoulder pressed to shoulder, shield raised. When the first charge came, it was a tidal wave of barbarian fury, their war cries shaking the Roman line. "Hold!" shouted the centurion. "Shields up!" The impact was thunderous. Spears splintered, shields shuddered. Leonidas felt the tremor surge through his bones. And then, instinct took over. His shield angled, catching a strike meant for the man beside him. His blade darted forward, finding the gap beneath an enemy's ribs. The soldier to his left stumbled. Leonidas shoved him upright, catching the slack. He moved with precision, not desperation. This was not the dance of a fool, it was the craft of a fighter forged in secret. By the battle's end, Leonidas was drenched in blood, none of it his own. His comrades looked at him with wide eyes, the jeers silenced by awe. The centurion clasped his shoulder. "You fight like a man born to it. Who trained you, fool?" Leonidas smirked through the sweat and gore. "Life, perhaps. Or maybe my grandfather's ghost." The centurion frowned but said no more. Yet word spread. In Rome, Ironheart sat in her chamber, letters strewn across her desk. Reports from the front had begun to trickle in. They spoke not of a jester humiliated in war, but of a soldier who fought with uncanny skill. Her chest tightened as she read. Relief warred with fear. Marcus, ever at her side, noticed the way her eyes lingered on the parchment. "Majesty, he survives." Her voice was softer than steel should allow. "Yes, he survives." Apollo entered without invitation, bowing stiffly. "Your Majesty, the fool's survival does not prove loyalty. It proves guile. He is cunning, hiding strength until now. That is the very nature of spies." She set down the letter, her gaze sharp as a drawn blade. "Or it proves courage." Apollo's jaw tightened. "Do not be deceived. I will see this through." On the battlefield's second day, Leonidas' name was already whispered in the camps. Men spoke of the fool who fought like 10. Songs began, crude and hurried, about the painted man who laughed in the face of death. By the end of the second week, when the Romans held the line against an overwhelming charge, it was Leonidas' cry that rallied them. His sword, once hidden in shadows, gleamed beneath the sun for all to see. The soldiers began to chant his name. "Leonidas! Leonidas!" And in Rome, Apollo clenched his fists so tightly the veins bulged, for with every chant of that name came another dagger into his pride. The campaign dragged on for months. By the second, Leonidas was no longer mocked but hailed as a talisman. Soldiers pressed cups of wine into his hands, cheered when he walked through the camps, and carved crude sketches of his face onto their shields. The fool warrior, they called him. At night, around fire pits, they begged for stories. Leonidas obliged, spinning jokes between tales of near-death clashes, lifting their spirits as easily as he lifted a blade. Laughter rang across the battlefield, a sound as valuable as steel when despair threatened to smother men's courage. But when the battles came, the laughter ended, and Leonidas' sword sang. His grandfather's training had not been wasted. Every strike was clean, every movement efficient. He fought not as a berserker but as a tactician, a predator who read the flow of combat like a book. Word reached Rome faster than the soldiers returned. The Queen heard it whispered in the halls of the Senate. Senators spoke of him with equal parts awe and suspicion. He rallies men with words as easily as steel. A fool should not be a hero. A man with such power is dangerous. And to Apollo, those whispers were like poison poured into his veins. When Leonidas was finally granted leave to return, Rome erupted. Citizens lined the streets, tossing olive branches and laurel crowns as he marched through the gates in battered armor, still wearing the faint trace of jester paint across his cheek. Children laughed. Women sang. Men clapped him on the back. Ironheart watched from her balcony, her heart pounding in a way that no war council had ever stirred. She had not seen him in months, yet there he was, alive, blooded, glorious. That night, when the city slept, she summoned Marcus. "Bring him," she whispered. The guard hesitated. "Majesty, it is dangerous. If the Senate learns." "Bring him." Marcus obeyed. And so, under cover of darkness, Leonidas slipped through marble halls into the queen's private chamber. He knelt before her, more solemn than she had ever seen him. "My queen." She dismissed the title with a wave. "Rise." When he did, their eyes locked, and silence hung between them like a taut bowstring. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, uncertain. "Why did you not tell me that I could fight?" he asked. "That you were not what you pretended to be." He smiled faintly. "Because jesters are ignored. Fools are safe. A warrior with no name would be watched, crushed, forgotten. But a fool?" He stepped closer. "A fool can move where others cannot. Even into the queen's heart." Her breath caught. No man had ever dared speak to her so plainly. She should have struck him, banished him. Instead, she whispered, "And now?" His hand brushed hers, calloused and scarred. "Now. I cannot pretend any longer." For weeks after, they met in secret. Nights filled with whispers and laughter, stolen touches beneath candlelight, the walls of Ironheart's palace trembling with the weight of their forbidden bond. But secrets do not sleep forever. General Apollo noticed. He saw the queen's eyes soften when Leonidas' name was mentioned, saw the subtle shifts in her demeanor, the way her lips betrayed a smile when news from the front was read aloud. In the Senate, Apollo stood tall, his voice venomous. "The fool deceives us all. He hides his skill, worms into the hearts of soldiers and queen alike. He is no hero. He is a spy, a traitor, sent to undo Rome from within." Murmurs spread. Doubts festered. And though the queen defended him, even she could not silence the storm entirely. Apollo had found his weapon. And he would use it. The Senate chamber was thick with incense and suspicion. Senators leaned across marble benches, their voices buzzing like hornets. Apollo stood at the center, bronze armor polished to a mirror's shine, his scarred jaw clenched with righteous fury. "Rome is blind," he thundered. "A fool plays the hero, and you cheer while the shadows of betrayal crawl beneath your very feet. Leonidas deceived us all. He is no soldier. He is a liar, hiding behind painted smiles, twisting the loyalty of our men." A senator raised a hand. "And yet he wins battles. Men follow him." "Men are easily swayed by spectacle," Apollo spat. "They cheer a jester because he makes them laugh. But laughter does not hold an empire together, discipline does. Loyalty does. We gamble with fire when we crown clowns as champions." The chamber stirred. Doubt spread. And though some senators still muttered of Leonidas' victories, others nodded at Apollo's words. At the edge of the chamber, Queen Ironheart's fingers dug into her throne, nails pressing crescent moons into the wood. Her silence was calculated, but her heart raged. To speak too strongly would expose her attachment. To say nothing risked leaving Leonidas defenseless. Finally, one senator broke the stalemate. "Then let the fool prove himself again. If his victories are real, let him march not against barbarians, but against the Gauls themselves." A cruel idea, fed by Apollo's smile. The motion passed before Ironheart could object. By dawn, the order was inked in blood-red wax. When Marcus delivered the summons to Leonidas, the warrior only grinned. "Back to the wolves, then," he said, strapping on his battered breastplate. Marcus frowned. "It is not just a campaign. It is a death march. They mean to bury you there." Leonidas paused, tying his braces. "Let them try." He looked past Marcus, his eyes finding the distant marble towers where Ironheart sat cloaked in duty. "I have faced jeers, blades, and the laughter of gods. What more can Rome throw at a fool who refuses to die? That night, Ironheart called him once more. Her chamber was lit by a single brazier, shadows trembling across the walls. She did not greet him with warmth, only with trembling restraint. "They send you north," she said, her voice brittle. "The Gauls are no mere skirmishers. They will devour legions whole. Do you understand what this means?" Leonidas stepped close, his presence grounding her storm. "That Rome wants me dead. That Apollo sharpens his blade not for Gauls, but for me." Her eyes shimmered, but her voice remained iron. "Then you must not fall. Not for them. Not for him." She reached out, fingers grazing his scarred cheek. "If you survive, Leonidas, Rome itself may bow to you." He caught her hand, pressed it to his lips, and smiled. "Then I will survive." The march north began under black skies. Leonidas led his cohort into lands where the air tasted of smoke and iron, where hills burned with the signal fires of Gauls preparing for war. The first clash came swiftly. A thunder of horns, a flood of painted warriors charging down the slopes. The Romans faltered until Leonidas roared into the fray, his blade cutting arcs of silver through the chaos. "Hold the line," he bellowed, his voice carrying like a storm. "Rome does not break. Not while fools stand with kings." The men rallied. Shields locked. Spears thrust. The Gauls crashed against them like waves against cliffs. And in the center, Leonidas carved a legend. But far behind, Apollo's spies watched from the hills, whispering back to their master. And Apollo, safe in Rome, tightened his grip on the dagger he meant to drive into Leonidas' back. The Gaulish campaign raged for months, each battle more brutal than the last. The enemy came in tides, painted faces, hair lime-stiffened into spikes, axes swinging like thunder. But again and again, Leonidas stood at the front, where steel clashed loudest and the blood ran deepest. The men followed him not because they were ordered to, but because he fought like one of them. He ate their bread, shared their water, bore the same mud and frost upon his shoulders. When night fell and fear gnawed at them, he told stories, crude jokes that had once made the queen herself laugh. Around campfires, hardened legionaries roared with laughter, their burdens eased by the fool-turned champion. And then came the Battle of Versing's Hill. The Gauls had the high ground, 3 times the Romans' number, and the legions wavered at the thought of climbing into certain slaughter. The centurions hesitated, eyes darting to Leonidas. He mounted a broken cart, his voice booming across the valley. "Look at them. Painted devils with their bellies full of wine, thinking Rome will bow to beasts. But I say we climb, not for generals, not for senators," his eyes burned with fire, "but for each other. For the man beside you who bleeds, who fears, who refuses to die alone. We climb because Rome is us. Not them. Not the marble liars in their towers. Us." A roar rose from the ranks. Shields banged, swords rattled, and the legions surged up the hill like a tidal wave. The clash was apocalyptic. Stones and spears rained down. Blood slicked the grass. But Leonidas was everywhere, darting through the line, blade flashing, shield braced. When a centurion fell, he took his place. When men faltered, he lifted them back to their feet. By dusk, the hill belonged to Rome. The Gauls lay scattered, their warlord's head planted on a Roman spear. And as the sun bled into the horizon, the soldiers did what no order commanded, they raised their weapons and chanted his name. "Leonidas! Leonidas! Leonidas!" It echoed across the valley like thunder. News traveled fast. By the time messengers reached Rome, his name carried more weight than Apollo's titles. The Senate tried to downplay it, but rumors swept through the streets. The jester of Rome had become its sword. Common folk whispered of him with awe. Soldiers sang of him in taverns. Even rival legions murmured that he might be the man Rome needed. Apollo felt the shift. His rivals in the Senate smiled too often, their eyes glinting with dangerous curiosity. Some already spoke of Leonidas as a future commander, perhaps more. At night, Apollo stalked his chamber like a caged beast, his envy gnawing at his bones. "How does a clown become a kingmaker?" he spat to his guards. "He is no noble, no patrician. He is filth in gilded rags." Yet they chant his name as if Jupiter himself descended. His hand trembled on his sword hilt. He thought of the queen, her laughter that day, the softness he had never once drawn from her. And rage curdled into something darker. If Rome will not bury him in the north, Apollo growled, then I will forge a grave myself. Meanwhile, Leonidas returned to camp with his men, his body battered but unbowed. That night, as the fires dimmed, he slipped away, past guards and sentries, into the shadows where she waited. Ironheart stood cloaked in midnight silk, her eyes reflecting the flames of a single torch. You lived, she whispered, her voice trembling despite her iron mask. Leonidas stepped close, dirt and blood still clinging to him. I told you, my queen. Not even death can take me from your side. For the first time, her hand found his without hesitation. And in that moment, though Rome seethed with plots and betrayal, they knew the fire between them burned stronger than crowns, stronger than war. But in the darkness beyond their embrace, Apollo's shadow stretched longer, hungrier, preparing the blade that would strike not at Leonidas' body, but at his bond with the queen herself. The Senate floor buzzed like a hornet's nest. The marble chamber echoed with whispers, shuffling togas, and the rasp of sandals on stone. All eyes cut toward the great bronze doors as they swung open, admitting General Apollo. His breastplate gleamed, his crimson cloak flowed behind him, and his jaw was set in feigned solemnity. My lords, he began, voice carrying with trained authority, I bring grave tidings from Gaul. The legions won a victory, yes, but under suspicious leadership. The room hushed. Apollo strode to the center, unfurling a scroll. Reports state that Leonidas the jester, he spat the word like poison, commands not with discipline, but with sedition. He feeds soldiers treasonous words, claiming Rome belongs not to her senate, not to her patrician order, but to the rabble of men who swing their swords. Gasps rippled. Senators glanced at one another, eyes sharpening with fear. Apollo pressed the knife deeper. If left unchecked, he will not only command their blades, but their loyalty. And should such a man return to Rome, what is to stop him from turning that loyalty against us? Against the crown itself? Whispers became murmurs. Murmurs became arguments. One senator slammed his staff on the floor. Are you saying he seeks the throne? Apollo raised his head with false reluctance. I pray not. But I say this, he hides too much. His training, his skill, his ambition. No mere jester gains the loyalty of hardened soldiers unless he is something more. And if he is something more, then Rome must ask, what is he hiding? By nightfall, rumors spread like wildfire. In taverns, men argued whether Leonidas was a hero or a usurper. In the streets, whispers painted him both savior and serpent. The queen summoned her council. She sat upon her throne, draped in gold and iron, her face schooled into a mask of control. Apollo stood before her, bowing low. My queen, he said silkily, forgive me, but I fear for you. This man, this Leonidas. He worms his way into hearts with laughter, wins battles with reckless valor, and conceals his true self from us all. Does that not trouble you? Her eyes narrowed, cold and calculating. It troubles me more that your envy blinds you, Apollo. The general stiffened, his pride pierced. Envy? My queen, I have served you faithfully. I think only of your safety. Then think better, she snapped. Leonidas fights where you do not. He bleeds where you will not. And Rome chants his name because he has earned it, not through titles, but through deeds. For a heartbeat, silence clung to the air. Apollo bowed again, but his jaw tightened. As you command. But know this, men who win the hearts of soldiers often win crowns, whether they seek them or not. Her hand tightened on her scepter. Leave me. That night, Leonidas stole into her chambers, slipping past loyal guards who pretended not to notice. He found her staring into the brazier's fire, her armor discarded, her crown resting beside her. They doubt you, she whispered. They doubt me. They fear you more than they fear their enemies. He moved to her side, lowering himself to one knee. Let them. I did not fight for their approval. I fought because I swore I would protect you, even if Rome itself turns against me. Her gaze softened, a rare crack in Ironheart's armor. And what if they force me to choose? Between you and the crown? Leonidas rose, cupping her face in his scarred hands. Then choose Rome. Because I will fight for you whether you wear a crown or not. Whether they call you queen, tyrant, or exile. My loyalty is to you, not their marble halls. For the first time in years, her iron mask shattered. Tears welled in her eyes, caught in the firelight. And when she kissed him, it was not as queen to subject, but as woman to man. But beyond those walls, Apollo's plans coiled tighter. If the queen would not see Leonidas as a danger, then Apollo would force her to. He dispatched spies into the night, bribed tongues with gold, and planted whispers of conspiracy. Soon, forged letters would surface, letters hinting at Leonidas conspiring with Gaulish chieftains, promising to spare them in exchange for their aid. Proof, Apollo thought savagely, of the traitor's mask. All he needed was the perfect moment to deliver the final strike. The Senate chamber was thick with incense and tension. Senators whispered among themselves as scrolls were carried in by Apollo's men, their seals unbroken, their ribbons gleaming crimson. My lords, Apollo's voice boomed, the truth has clawed its way into daylight. He lifted one of the scrolls, snapping the wax seal with deliberate drama. Letters, secret letters, between Leonidas and the Gaulish chieftains. He unrolled it, reading aloud. Spare my men, and in return I will open the gates of Rome itself. For together, we can rule not as enemies, but as brothers. Gasps shot through the chamber. Senators rose to their feet, outrage and disbelief colliding. Forgery, cried one old patrician. These are forged. Apollo spread his arms with mock hurt. Would I stake my honor on lies? These were seized by my scouts, pulled from Gaulish corpses. Do you think such men can craft Latin so fine? No. This is his hand. The jester's hand. The chamber erupted into chaos. Some senators pounded their staffs, shouting for Leonidas' execution. Others demanded proof beyond ink and parchment. Then Apollo turned his venom toward the throne. My queen, he said, bowing with feigned reverence, I beg you to see reason. This man you protect has already betrayed you. He laughs, yes, but behind that laughter festers treachery. If we cannot execute him, then at least let us test his loyalty in the flames of war. Send him to the frontlines, where Rome bleeds most. If he is true, he will return. If not, then the gods themselves will judge him. All eyes fixed on her. Ironheart sat unmoving, her face cold, unreadable. But beneath the mask, her chest burned with rage. She knew the letters were false, Apollo's hand was all over them. Yet the Senate clamored for punishment, and even her allies hesitated to defend Leonidas too strongly. To shield him now would only confirm their suspicions. Her eyes flicked to Leonidas, standing shackled before them. His gaze never wavered, though bruises marred his skin from Apollo's guards. For a moment, time froze between them. She wanted to scream, to shatter her crown upon the marble and tell them she would rather die than let them strip him from her side. But she was queen, not woman, in that chamber. Her voice rang clear. Very well. He shall go to the front lines. Not as a prisoner, but as a soldier of Rome. If the gods favor him, he will return victorious. If not, then his fate is sealed. The Senate erupted, some cheering, some murmuring with satisfaction. Apollo smiled like a viper tasting blood. The following dawn, Leonidas stood in chains as soldiers readied his armor. They had stripped him of his jester's colors, dressing him instead in battered legionary steel. You don't have to go, whispered one of the younger guards, shame in his eyes. We know this is Apollo's doing. If you try to run, some of us. No, Leonidas cut him off softly. I go. Because they think it punishment. But I will turn it into proof. They will see I am no spy. And one day, when Rome chants again, it will not be Apollo they name. The guard swallowed hard and bowed his head. That night, before his departure, he was granted one final audience. She came cloaked, slipping past guards with only her most trusted handmaid. The chamber was bare save for a single torch. I should have denied them, she whispered fiercely. I should have cut Apollo down where he stood. Leonidas smiled faintly, though his eyes burned. You would have lost everything. Your throne. Your crown. Your people. No, let me carry this burden. Let me fight in their wars until they cannot deny the truth. Her fingers trembled against his cheek. And if you die, then I die as I was meant to live. Not as fool, not as traitor, but as soldier. As the man who kept his oath to you. For a moment, her iron heart cracked again. She kissed him, fierce and desperate, tasting salt and fire. When she pulled away, her breath shook. Then return to me, Leonidas. Or I swear, Rome itself will burn. He looked at her, drinking her in as if she were his last sunrise. I will return, because Rome cannot take from me what it did not give, my love for you. At dawn, he marched with the legions. Apollo stood atop the steps, arms folded, watching with quiet glee. But even he felt the chill as the soldiers glanced not to him, but to Leonidas. Whispers carried on the wind, and somewhere deep within Apollo's chest, the first crack of unease stirred. For though he had hurled the jester into fire, he could not silence the chant still echoing in the soldiers' bones. Leonidas, Leonidas, Leonidas. The northern campaign was supposed to be a death sentence. The terrain was brutal, forests thick with shadows, rivers swollen with spring flood, and Gaulish tribes striking from every direction. Rome had lost more men there in a single year than in 5 campaigns combined. They sent Leonidas with little more than half a legion, hoping the wilderness would consume him. Apollo's allies in the Senate even joked, by the time he freezes in the mud, his name will be forgotten. But Rome miscalculated. From the first ambush, Leonidas showed them what true leadership looked like. When the enemy cut the legion's supply lines, it was Leonidas who hunted wild boar with his own hands, roasting meat over campfires, feeding men before himself. When Gaulish raiders struck at night, it was Leonidas who dove into the fray first, shield raised, shouting until the men surged behind him. When morale faltered, it was Leonidas who told stories, half jests, half-truths, that made even hardened veterans chuckle through broken teeth. Bit by bit, the soldiers stopped calling him fool and started calling him commander. Then came the siege of Calvus Ford. The Gauls had fortified the river crossing with sharpened stakes, towers of stone, and walls of timber. The Romans, starving and battered, stood on the opposite bank, despair in their eyes. A centurion muttered, "No force can break that. We are already dead." Leonidas mounted a boulder, his battered shield raised high. "Dead," he roared. "No. Not while breath fills our lungs. Not while steel weighs in our hands. Look across that river. They believe we are beaten, because Rome sent us here to die. But I say, let us show them what death truly fears." The soldiers roared back, their exhaustion burned away in the fire of his words. That night, under cover of darkness, Leonidas led a daring strike across the river. He swam the current with a handful of men, scaling the walls with ropes and blades between their teeth. By dawn, the gates of Calvus Ford swung wide, and the Roman standard rose over the fortress. When the rest of the legion charged through, they found their commander already blooded, laughing, standing amidst the slain Gauls like Mars himself reborn. The victory was absolute. Songs were sung that night, rough and raucous, echoing through the forest. Soldiers pounded their shields, chanting the name the Senate had tried to bury. Leonidas, Leonidas, Leonidas. Back in Rome, the news struck like thunder. The Senate gnashed their teeth. Apollo shattered a goblet in his rage. Yet the people poured into the streets, chanting the name of the man who had turned death into triumph. Even rival generals begrudgingly admitted his brilliance. Some whispered that he was no longer merely a soldier, but a leader Rome might one day need more than its scheming patricians. And in the palace, Ironheart listened to the chants echoing into her throne room. She allowed herself a small, secret smile. Her jester had become Rome's lion. But Apollo was not finished. Late one night, he summoned his most loyal captains. By torchlight, his face twisted with fury, he whispered his plan. If the Senate cannot bury him, if the frontlines cannot kill him, then we must turn his own glory into ruin. The people worship him now, yes, but adoration can become suspicion. Love can sour into fear. All it takes is one blade, one staged betrayal, one spark of blood to paint him as the tyrant they dread. His captains exchanged uneasy glances. "You would frame him?" Apollo's eyes glowed like embers. I would destroy him. For if he is allowed to return again, Rome will crown not me, not her, his teeth clenched, but a bastard jester who never deserved the dust on his boots. Unaware of the plots against him, Leonidas stood in the heart of the conquered fortress, gazing across the river under the moonlight. One of his centurions approached. "Commander, word spreads fast. They're saying you may march south next, into Rome itself. That the queen herself waits for your return." Leonidas' jaw tightened, though his heart ached at the thought of her. "I will return," he said quietly, "but not to claim crowns or titles. Only to keep the oath I swore." The centurion studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then may the gods shield you. Because Rome will not." And though the men chanted his name into the night, Leonidas felt the chill of prophecy in those words. For in the shadows, Apollo's knife was already being sharpened. The streets of Rome throbbed with life the day Leonidas returned. Trumpets blared, flowers rained from balconies, and commoners surged in rivers to see the man they now called the Lion of Rome. Children clambered onto their fathers' shoulders to glimpse him, chanting his name as if it were a hymn. Leonidas, Leonidas. He marched not as prisoner but as victor, clad in battered armor that gleamed like bronze fire in the sun. His soldiers followed, proud and blooded, carrying Gaulish banners torn and stained. Every step he took reverberated like a drumbeat of defiance against those who had tried to bury him. But as he crossed the forum, he saw it, the stiffened spines of senators, the narrowed eyes of patricians, and at their center, General Apollo, his smile razor-thin. The queen sat upon her throne in the Senate hall, regal and still as carved marble. Her iron mask betrayed nothing, but her heart thundered when his eyes found hers. For one heartbeat, it was not a queen and subject who looked upon each other, it was a woman and the man who had defied death to return to her. Then Apollo stepped forward. "My queen," his voice carried sharp as steel, "before you stands a hero, or so he would have us believe. But heroes do not conspire with gall. Heroes do not weave secret plots. This man," he gestured to Leonidas with venom, "is no lion. He is a serpent who basks in glory while sharpening his fangs for the throne." A murmur swept through the chamber. Senators leaned forward, hungry for scandal. Apollo signaled his guards, who dragged forth a blooded man, an alleged Gaulish envoy. The envoy spat through broken teeth. It was Leonidas. "He promised us mercy. He..." Before he could finish, Leonidas' voice thundered over him. "Lies." He stepped forward, eyes blazing. "This man is no envoy. He is one of Apollo's dogs, dressed in false chains." He ripped the man's tunic, revealing Roman tattoos on his arm, markings of Apollo's personal guard. The chamber gasped. Apollo paled, but his fury ignited instantly. "A trick. A clever trick. Do you see?" He deflects because he knows the truth damns him. Leonidas' hand tightened on his sword hilt. "The truth, Apollo, is that you would see Rome burn before letting another's name rise above yours." For a heartbeat, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The queen rose. Her scepter struck the marble with a thunderous crack. Enough. The hall froze. Her eyes swept the chamber like a storm. 11 years I have ruled. 11 years you have called me Ironheart because I did not bend, because I did not break. And now I tell you this, I will not stand by while Rome tears itself apart over lies and envy. She turned her gaze on Leonidas. It was softer, but laced with steel. "Leonidas has fought where none of you would. He has bled for Rome while you sharpened tongues in these halls. His loyalty is not to crowns or titles, but to the people, to me." The words hung heavy, undeniable, dangerous. Apollo's face twisted. "You," he stepped forward, hand on his blade. "You would throw away Rome for him? For a jester? For a bastard with no name?" The queen's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Apollo, or it will be your name that ends in disgrace." But Apollo snapped. With a roar, he drew his sword and lunged. Steel rang out, a scream of death denied. Leonidas moved like lightning, his blade intercepting Apollo's in a shower of sparks. The Senate erupted into chaos, senators fleeing, guards rushing in, the roar of the crowd outside flooding through the hall. The duel was ferocious. Apollo struck with brute force, driven by rage, his blows raining like hammers. But Leonidas fought with clarity, with the discipline of a man who had trained in shadows his whole life. Clash after clash, until at last, Leonidas disarmed him. Apollo's sword clattered across the marble, and Leonidas' blade pressed against his throat. The hall fell silent. Apollo sneered even with death kissing his skin. "Do it, bastard. Prove me right. Show them the beast you are." Leonidas' chest heaved. For a moment, rage tempted him. But then he lowered his blade. "No," he said, voice ringing with conviction. "Rome has had enough of beasts." The queen raised her hand, and guards seized Apollo. He struggled, cursed, but his words drowned under the roar of senators who had seen enough. Ironheart's voice cut through it all. "General Apollo, by decree of crown and senate, you are stripped of title and honor. You will spend the rest of your days in exile, remembered only for your envy." Apollo's scream echoed as he was dragged away, his dream of power shattering to dust. When silence returned, the queen stepped down from her throne, her eyes locked on Leonidas. For the first time, before all of Rome, she did not hide her heart. She took his hand. "They will curse me for this. They will fear you. But I do not care." The crowd outside, still chanting his name, seemed to shake the marble itself. "Leonidas! Leonidas!" He leaned close, his voice meant only for her. "Let them chant. Let them curse. I need no crown, no title. I need only this, your hand in mine." And for the first time, Ironheart, cold, cruel, unyielding, let the world see her smile.